Ambassador Lillian Wright stood at the viewing window of the USS Envoy, watching as Earth grew smaller behind them. At 52, she had spent her life in diplomatic service, but never imagined she would represent all of humanity to an alien coalition. Her silver-streaked brown hair was pulled back in its usual neat bun, and her blue eyes reflected the distant light of her home planet. "It's something, isn't it?" Captain John Miller joined her at the window. He was a tall man with a weathered face and kind eyes that belied his military bearing. "No matter how many times I leave orbit, watching Earth fade away never gets easier." Lillian nodded. "We carry it with us, though. 7 billion souls depending on what we accomplish out there." The USS Envoy accelerated toward the jump point that would take them to the Arcturus system. It was humanity's most advanced vessel, though intelligence suggested it would appear primitive to the Arcturus Confederation. The ship had been outfitted, with every comfort possible for the 6-week journey, but Lillian planned to spend most of that time working. "Ambassador, the crew is assembled in the briefing room whenever you're ready," said Communications Officer Alan Hayes, a young man with bright eyes and an even brighter mind who could process language patterns faster than any computer. Lillian took one last look at the shrinking blue dot of Earth. "Let's not keep them waiting, then." The briefing room held the key personnel for the mission. Security Chief Diane Garcia, a compact woman whose alertness reminded Lillian of a coiled spring, stood near the door. Cultural Attaché William Davis sat reviewing notes on his tablet, his round glasses slipping down his nose. Davis had absorbed more information about the 7 species of the Arcturus Confederation than anyone else on Earth. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lillian began, "in 6 weeks we will make history as the first official diplomatic mission to the Arcturus Confederation. Our job is simple on paper but complex in practice. Establish peaceful relations, negotiate fair trade agreements, and secure Earth's recognition as a sovereign entity." Captain Miller activated the room's holographic display, showing images of the 7 alien species that made up the Confederation. "Intelligence reports suggest we'll primarily be dealing with the Valrani," he said, zooming in on a tall, slender being with iridescent skin and 4 arms. "They control 4 of the 7 votes in the Confederation Council." William Davis stood up. "The Valrani achieved space travel about 300 years before humans. They consider themselves culturally superior to most species. Initial contact reports suggest they view us as—" He paused, searching for a diplomatic phrase. "As primitive," Security Chief Garcia finished for him. "Let's not sugarcoat it. They think we're backward." Lillian smiled slightly. "Then we have the advantage of being underestimated. Never a bad position in negotiations." For the next 6 weeks, the crew of the USS Envoy prepared intensively. Lillian studied Valrani cultural customs until she could recite their complex greeting rituals in her sleep. Alan Hayes mastered the clicking secondary language the Valrani used for emphasis. William Davis memorized the history of all 7 Confederation species. And Diane Garcia ran security drills preparing for any possible threat. On the final day before arrival, Lillian called Captain Miller to her quarters. Her room was sparse. She had never been one for personal items, with only a small photo of her late husband on the desk. "Captain, I want to speak plainly," she said. "We've received a lot of optimistic briefings about this mission, but my gut tells me we need to be careful." Miller nodded. "I've served in enough delicate situations to know that friendly faces don't always mean friendly intentions." "Exactly. The speed with which the Confederation invited a diplomatic mission after first contact strikes me as unusual. Species that advanced should be more cautious." "What are you thinking?" Miller asked, leaning forward. "I'm thinking they want something from Earth. The question is what and what they're willing to do to get it." Lillian handed him a small data chip. "If anything happens to me, get this back to Earth. It contains my private assessment of everything we know about the Confederation, including inconsistencies in their first contact story." Miller pocketed the chip without question. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." When the USS Envoy finally dropped out of faster-than-light travel near Arcturus Prime, the view took everyone's breath away. The planet was ringed with massive structures, Space stations, shipyards, and orbital cities connected by gleaming transport tubes. Ships of various designs moved between these structures like fish in a coral reef. "My God," Alan Hayes whispered from his communication station. "Our entire orbital infrastructure could fit in one of those stations." "Stay focused," Lillian reminded him. "We knew they were advanced. Don't let it intimidate you." A transmission came through, and a Valrani face appeared on the main screen. The alien skin shimmered with colors that seemed to represent words as much as the sounds from its mouth. "USS Envoy, this is Arcturus Prime Orbital Control. Your arrival is acknowledged. Proceed to docking coordinates being transmitted to your navigation system." As the Envoy approached the massive central station, they were escorted by two sleek ships that Captain Miller quietly noted were almost certainly weapon platforms, despite their elegant design. Lillian wore Earth's formal diplomatic uniform, a deep blue suit with silver trim representing Earth's oceans and atmosphere. As she prepared to lead her team off the ship, Diane Garcia approached her. "Ambassador, I've analyzed their docking procedures. They've placed us in a berth that could be easily sealed off from the rest of the station." Lillian nodded. "Noted, Chief Garcia. Stay alert but not aggressive. Remember, we're guests here until proven otherwise." The airlock cycled, and Lillian led her team into the Arcturus Prime Central Diplomatic Station. The architecture was both organic and geometric, with soaring ceilings and materials that seemed to flow rather than stand rigid. Waiting for them was a delegation of aliens, predominantly the tall four-armed Valrani. At the front stood a particularly imposing figure, nearly 7 feet tall with skin that rippled with deep purple and blue patterns. He wore what appeared to be ceremonial armor that accentuated his already impressive frame. "Ambassador Wright of Earth," the Valrani said in perfect English. "I am High Chancellor Zexitoral of the Valrani Ascendancy and the Arcturus Confederation Council. We welcome you to join the civilized stars." Lillian performed the perfect Valrani greeting, tilting her head at precisely the right angle and holding her hands in the traditional open palm position. "High Chancellor, Earth is honored by your welcome. We come in peace and friendship, eager to learn from those who have traveled the stars longer than we." Zexitoral's skin flickered with patterns that Davis had taught her indicated surprise, and perhaps a hint of approval. "You have studied our ways. Good. That will make your transition easier." Something about his choice of words sent a small chill down Lillian's spine, but she maintained her diplomatic smile. "We look forward to transition from strangers to friends, High Chancellor." Zextoral's four arms performed a complex gesture that the Earth team had never seen in their briefings. "Indeed, Ambassador Wright, the Confederation has great plans for Earth and its people. Very great plans indeed." As they were led deeper into the station, Lillian caught Captain Miller's eye. His slight nod told her he had noticed it too. Beneath the Valrani's polished diplomatic veneer lay something else, something that felt less like welcome and more like assessment. The diplomatic mission had begun, but so had Lillian's real work, discovering what the Arcturus Confederation truly wanted from Earth. 2 months into the diplomatic mission, Ambassador Lillian Wright sat in her assigned quarters reviewing documents on her secure tablet. The room was luxurious by Earth standards, with sweeping views of Arcturus Prime's ringed moons, but she barely noticed the view anymore. Her focus was entirely on the file she had just discovered in the Confederation's public records system. The file mentioned something called Resource Extraction Protocol 37 multiple times. The protocol itself wasn't detailed, but it was consistently referenced alongside planets that had been granted protected status by the Confederation. Exactly the status the Valrani were pushing Earth to accept in negotiations. A soft chime at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Enter," she called, quickly switching her tablet to a different document. Captain John Miller walked in looking tired but alert. Like the rest of the Earth delegation, he'd maintained a careful schedule of exercise to counter the slightly lighter gravity of the station. "Ambassador, do you have a moment?" Lillian nodded and activated the privacy field William Davis had installed in her quarters. The soft hum indicated it was working, blocking any listening devices the Valrani might have placed. "What have you found, John?" she asked once they were secure. "Security Chief Garcia has confirmed what we suspected. The military presence around our diplomatic compound has tripled in the last week. They're trying to be subtle about it, but she counted at least 30 more guards during her morning run." Lillian tapped her tablet. "That matches what I've discovered. Look at this." She showed him the document mentioning Resource Extraction Protocol 37. Every planet that accepted protected status has gone silent within a year of joining the Confederation. No outgoing communications, no independent trade, nothing. Miller's jaw tightened. "That's 3 separate warning signs now. We need to contact Earth." "Agreed. Have Alan try again with the direct quantum communicator. If that fails, we'll need to use the emergency protocols." After Miller left, Lillian continued her research. She had been careful to access only public records, making seemingly random information requests to avoid creating a pattern. The picture emerging was troubling. The Valrani-dominated Confederation wasn't the benevolent galactic community it claimed to be. Meanwhile, in another section of the diplomatic compound, William Davis was meeting with his contact, a Peloran, named Thrix. The Peloran were one of the smaller species in the Confederation, bird-like beings with feathered crests and quick, darting movements. Davis had met Thrix during a cultural exchange event and had carefully cultivated the relationship. They sat in a small garden area designed to accommodate multiple species. Thrix nervously preened his blue-green feathers as he spoke. "Your questions put me in danger, William Davis, but I cannot stay silent anymore." Thrix's voice was musical, even when speaking English. "The last 3 worlds that joined under protected status suffered greatly." Davis kept his expression neutral, despite his internal alarm. "What do you mean, suffered?" Thrix looked around before continuing, his crest flattening in distress. "The Valrani stripped those worlds of rare minerals and biological resources. The native populations were moved to what they call development zones, but are really work camps." "And the other Confederation species allow this?" Davis asked. "The Valrani control most votes. Some of us oppose their methods, but—" Thrix's voice trailed off. "But you're afraid," Davis finished. Thrix nodded. "The Valrani have ruled the Confederation for 300 years. They keep the other species divided and competing for favor." "Thank you for telling me this," Davis said. "You've shown great courage." As they parted ways, Davis didn't notice the Valrani observer watching from a hidden alcove, recording their entire conversation. In the communications center of the USS Envoy, Alan Hayes was growing frustrated. For the 3rd time that week, the quantum communicator failed to establish a connection with Earth. "It's definitely being blocked," he told Diane Garcia, who stood guard at the door. "The technology should work perfectly at this distance." Garcia's hand rested near her sidearm, a habit she'd developed since arriving at Arcturus Prime. "Can you bypass it?" "I'm trying a different approach. Instead of going through the Confederation relay, I'm bouncing the signal off a nearby pulsar." Hayes worked quickly, his fingers flying over the controls. "If I can just—" The screen flickered and showed a connection forming, then suddenly went dark. A message in Valrani script flashed briefly before the system rebooted. "What was that?" Garcia asked. Hayes stared at the console. "They're not just blocking us. They're intercepting everything and reviewing it before transmission. We're being monitored." Garcia swore under her breath. "We need to tell the ambassador. Immediately." That evening, the Earth delegation gathered in Ambassador Wright's quarters, with the privacy field at maximum strength. Each reported their findings. "So we're effectively cut off from Earth," Lillian summarized after hearing Hayes' report. "And based on what Davis learned from his Peloran contact, the Confederation, or at least the Valrani, have a history of exploiting new member worlds. And they're closing in around us," Garcia added. "The increased security presence isn't for our protection. It's to monitor and potentially contain us." Captain Miller leaned forward. "Ambassador, I recommend we initiate emergency evacuation protocols. We can be on the Envoy and out of the system within 6 hours." Lillian considered this but shook her head. Not yet. If we run, we confirm any suspicions they have. And Earth needs to know what we've learned. Tomorrow, I'll confront High Chancellor Zextoral directly about Resource Extraction Protocol 37. That's risky, Garcia warned. Diplomacy is always risky, Lillian replied with a grim smile. But sometimes being direct is the only path forward. If I can get Zextoral to reveal even part of their true intentions, it will help Earth prepare for whatever comes next. The UIM. Next morning, Ambassador Wright prepared for her meeting with High Chancellor Zextoral. She wore her formal diplomatic uniform and carried only her official tablet. As a precaution, she had downloaded all her findings onto a small data chip, which Captain Miller now carried. "Be careful, Ambassador," Miller said as they walked toward the grand meeting hall. "The High Chancellor isn't used to being challenged. Sometimes the best defense is a direct question," Lillian replied. "Stay alert, Captain. If anything happens, your priority is getting that information back to Earth." The meeting hall was a vast chamber with soaring ceilings and walls that seemed to shift colors with the light. High Chancellor Zextoral was already seated at the head of a long table, his forearms arranged in a formal pose. Several other Valrani officials flanked him. "Ambassador Wright," Zextoral greeted her, his skin rippling with colors. "I understand you requested this special session with some urgency." "Thank you for meeting me, High Chancellor," Lillian said, taking her seat. Captain Miller stood behind her, while Davis, Garcia, and Hayes positioned themselves around the room. "I've been reviewing the history of the Confederation's expansion and have some questions about your integration protocols. Specifically, Resource Extraction Protocol 37. The ripples across Zextoral's skin momentarily froze, then darkened to a deep purple. The other Valrani exchanged quick glances. "That is an internal administrative designation," Zextoral said smoothly. "Nothing. That concerns potential new members." "I believe it does concern us," Lillian pressed, "especially since every world that accepted protected status has gone silent within a year of joining the Confederation." The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. The Valrani officials stood, and Zextoral's voice took on a dangerous edge. "You have been accessing restricted information, Ambassador. That is most unfortunate." Lillian maintained her composure. "All my research came from public archives, High Chancellor. If the information is restricted, perhaps you should improve your security protocols." As she spoke, she noticed movement at the doors to the meeting hall. Valrani security forces were entering quietly, taking up positions around the room. Captain Miller shifted closer to her chair. "Ambassador," he said quietly, "we should leave now." Lillian started to rise, but Zextoral's voice stopped her. "I think not, Ambassador Wright. It seems our diplomatic discussions must now take a different form." He made a sharp gesture, and the Valrani guards moved forward. "Your species requires proper guidance before joining the civilized stars. We will provide that guidance whether you wish it or not." Security Chief Garcia moved instantly, putting herself between the ambassador and the approaching guards. "Ambassador, exit Route 3, she said calmly, drawing her weapon. Chaos erupted in the meeting hall as the Earth delegation made their desperate attempt to escape what was no longer a diplomatic mission, but a trap. Security Chief Diane Garcia fired her weapon with precision, hitting the two nearest Valrani guards. The shots didn't kill them. Their tough skin absorbed much of the impact. But it knocked them back long enough to create an opening. "Move," she shouted to the Earth delegation. Ambassador Lillian Wright ran alongside Captain Miller while Hayes and Davis followed close behind. Garcia covered their retreat, firing methodically to slow the Valrani pursuit without causing fatal injuries. She was still trying to follow diplomatic protocols even as those protocols crumbled around them. The Earth team ducked into a service corridor that Garcia had mapped during her security sweeps. The narrow passage wasn't built for the larger Valrani, giving the humans a brief advantage. "We need to reach the envoy," Miller said as they ran. "It's our only way out of here." A blast of energy hit the wall beside them, sending sparks flying. The Valrani had breached the corridor behind them. "Take the next left," Garcia ordered. "There's an emergency transport tube that leads to the docking level." As they rounded the corner, a squad of Valrani security forces appeared ahead of them, blocking their path. The Earth delegation was trapped between two groups of armed aliens. "Surrender now," the lead Valrani commanded, his weapon aimed at Ambassador Wright's chest. "Further resistance will only increase your punishment." Garcia assessed the situation in seconds. "Ambassador, there's a maintenance hatch 3 meters to your right. It leads to the environmental control section. Take it." Without waiting for a response, Garcia charged the Valrani ahead of them, firing rapidly. The sudden attack created the distraction they needed. Miller pushed right toward the hatch while Davis helped Hayes, who had been hit by debris in the earlier blast. "Chief Garcia," Wright called out, seeing the security officer take a direct hit from a Valrani weapon. Garcia stumbled but remained, standing, continuing to fire. "Go, Ambassador, get to the ship." Miller pulled the hatch open and ushered Wright inside. "We have to move, Ambassador. She's buying us time." The last thing Wright saw before entering the maintenance tunnel was Garcia, falling to her knees under concentrated fire from Valrani weapons. The security chief's eyes met hers briefly. A silent goodbye. In the environmental control section, the remaining 4 members of the Earth delegation moved quickly through a maze of pipes and machinery. The air was thick with steam and the smell of alien chemicals. "The docking bay should be 2 levels down," Miller said, consulting the small holographic map Garcia had prepared for emergencies. "There's an access ladder ahead." As they reached the ladder, a tremor ran through the station, throwing them off balance. "They've initiated lockdown procedures," Hayes said, his face pale from pain and fear. "They'll seal the docking bays." "Then, we need to move faster," Miller replied, helping Hayes onto the ladder. They descended rapidly, the sounds of alarm klaxons growing louder. At the bottom of the ladder, Davis peeked through a small viewport. "The docking level is crawling with security," he reported. "I count at least 20 guards between us and the envoy." Miller checked his weapon. "We'll have to fight our way through." "No," Ambassador Wright said firmly. "We'd never make it, and even if some of us did, the envoy wouldn't get past the station's defensive systems." She took a deep breath. "We need a new plan." "What do you suggest, Ambassador?" Miller asked. "The priority is getting the information back to Earth. They need to know what the Confederation is planning." Wright removed a small data chip from her collar, a backup of the one Miller carried. "William, you're the least likely to be seen as a threat. You need to find another way off this station." Davis looked stunned. "Ambassador, I can't just leave you." "That's an order, Attaché Davis," Wright said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "Find your Pelleran contact. There must be ships that leave the station regularly. Get on one, get back to Earth, warn them." A nearby explosion rocked the corridor as Valrani forces blasted through a sealed door. "They're getting closer," Hayes warned. Wright handed the data chip to Davis. "Go now, through that maintenance shaft. It should lead to the commercial section of the station." Davis hesitated, then nodded, taking the chip. "I'll get the information to Earth, Ambassador, I promise." As Davis disappeared into the shaft, Wright turned to Miller and Hayes. "Gentlemen, now we create a diversion to give him time." Miller understood immediately. "We surrender, loudly and obviously." "Exactly," Wright agreed. "Let's make sure all eyes are on us." They stepped out into the main corridor, weapons lowered. Within seconds, they were surrounded by Valrani guards. "Ambassador Wright," a familiar voice said. High Chancellor Zextoral approached, his skin pulsing with dark colors that indicated anger and triumph. "Your primitive attempt at escape has cost the lives of several of my guards. That will be added to your crimes. We acted in self-defense after you ordered our detainment without cause," Wright replied calmly. "I invoke diplomatic immunity under intergalactic common law." Zextoral made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Intergalactic common law applies to civilized species, Ambassador. Your actions today have proven humans are not ready for such considerations." Miller and Hayes were roughly restrained by Valrani guards. Wright remained dignified, her back straight and her gaze steady as she was bound and led away. For 3 weeks, Ambassador Wright endured isolation and interrogation. The Valrani wanted detailed information about Earth's defenses, resources, and population centers. Wright revealed nothing regardless of the methods they used to extract information. In another part of the station, Captain Miller was being held in a cell designed to break his spirit. The ceiling was too low to stand fully upright, and the lighting alternated between painfully bright and total darkness at random intervals. Food and water came irregularly, keeping him in a constant state of uncertainty. Despite these conditions, Miller worked systematically on a plan to escape. He used techniques from Garcia's security training, observing guard rotations and testing different sections of his cell for weaknesses. On the 22nd day of his captivity, Miller found what he had been looking for, a small flaw in the cell's waste disposal system. Using a piece of metal he had worked loose from his bed frame, he managed to override the locking mechanism. The corridor outside his cell was dimly lit and empty. Miller moved silently, staying close to the wall. He had memorized the guard patterns and knew he had approximately 8 minutes before the next patrol. His first priority was locating the ambassador. His second was finding Hayes, who had been separated from them during processing. Based on overheard conversations between guards, Miller believed they were being held in the high-security section one level up. As he reached the access stairwell, Miller heard a familiar voice. Weak, but unmistakable. It was Garcia. Somehow she had survived the confrontation during their escape attempt. Following the sound, Miller found her in a medical cell. She was badly injured, connected to alien medical equipment that seemed to be keeping her alive while also preventing her wounds from fully healing, keeping her in a state where she could still be interrogated. "Captain," she whispered when she saw him. Her usually strong voice was barely audible. "You got out." "I'm getting all of us out," Miller promised, working to disconnect her from the machines. Garcia grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. "No. You need to find the ambassador. I'll only slow you down." "Chief, listen to me," Garcia interrupted. "The Valrani security hub is 3 levels up, north quadrant. You can access their systems there, find where they're holding Wright and Hayes." Miller knew she was right, but leaving her felt wrong. "I'll come back for you." Garcia shook her head. "The ambassador is the priority. Earth needs to know what we discovered." She pressed something into his hand. A small explosive device she had somehow concealed from the Valrani. "This will help." With reluctance, Miller left Garcia and made his way toward the security hub. The device she had given him would be enough to create a distraction, possibly enough to reach the ambassador. But as Miller approached the security hub, alarms suddenly blared throughout the station. His escape had been discovered. The corridors, filled with Valrani security forces, and Miller was forced to retreat. As he searched for another route, Miller passed a viewing window and froze at what he saw. In a large chamber below, Ambassador Wright was strapped to an examination table, surrounded by Valrani scientists. High Chancellor Zexitoral stood watching as they worked, his skin rippling with colors that Miller had learned to recognize as satisfaction. The sight filled Miller with cold rage. Whatever diplomatic mission they had come on was truly over now. The only question was whether any of them would survive to warn Earth about what they had discovered. Back on Earth, Admiral Karen Scott paced the floor of the Space Command Operations Center. It had been over a month since all communications with Ambassador Wright's diplomatic mission had stopped. The large screens on the wall showed the last known position of the USS Envoy and a countdown clock marking the time since their last transmission. "Admiral, we've picked up something entering the solar system," a young officer reported from his monitoring station. "It's small, moving fast, and using an approach vector that matches our protocols." Scott moved to look over the officer's shoulder. "Is it the Envoy?" "No, ma'am. Much smaller. About the size of a shuttlecraft. Put it on screen and alert Luna Defense Station to be ready for anything." The main view screen changed to show a small vessel approaching Earth. It didn't match any known design in their database, but it was broadcasting an Earth diplomatic identification code. "Order Luna Station to intercept but not to engage," Scott commanded. "I want that vessel quarantined until we know what we're dealing with." Hours later, Scott stood in the secure observation room at Luna Defense Station, watching as technicians in protective suits examined the small alien craft. It had docked without resistance, but no one had emerged. Life signs? Scott asked the medical officer beside her. One human, Admiral, weak but stable. The technicians finally managed to open the main hatch. Inside, they found a man strapped to a medical support chair. Even through the camera feed, Scott could see he was in bad shape. That's Captain Miller, she said, recognizing the USS Envoy's commander despite his haggard appearance. Get him to medical immediately. Behind Miller's chair were 7 stasis containers, each bearing the Earth diplomatic seal. The technicians carefully removed them from the vessel. What are those? Scott asked. Unknown, Admiral. They're sealed and require diplomatic clearance codes to open. Scott's face hardened. Bring them to Secure Lab 3. I'll meet you there. In the medical center, doctors worked to stabilize Captain Miller. He drifted in and out of consciousness, his body showing signs of severe trauma and malnutrition. When Scott arrived, he was awake but disoriented. Captain Miller, she said gently, standing beside his bed. You're safe. You're on Luna Station. Miller's eyes focused on her with effort. Admiral, they want our resources. Earth is next on their list. Who, Captain? The Confederation. Vahalrani, Miller managed to say before a fit of coughing overtook him. They kill. They enslave. Wright tried to warn. Where is Ambassador Wright? Scott asked. Miller's eyes filled with tears. Containers. They sent her back in pieces. Scott felt ice form in her stomach. Rest, Captain. We'll talk more when you're stronger. She left the medical center and headed directly to Secure Lab 3, where the stasis containers had been taken. The chief medical officer met her outside the lab. Admiral, we've opened the first container, he said, his face pale. You need to see this. Inside the lab, Scott stared at the contents of the open container. It held a human hand, perfectly preserved. A woman's right hand still wearing the signet ring of Earth's diplomatic corps. DNA confirms it belongs to Ambassador Wright, the medical officer said quietly. Scott's voice was tight with controlled fury. Open the others. One by one, the remaining containers were opened. Each held another part of Ambassador Wright's body, methodically dismembered. Attached to the final container was a data crystal with Vahalrani markings. Get that to analysis immediately, Scott ordered. I want to know what's on it. Within an hour, the crystal had been decoded, and its contents displayed on the secure screens. In Scott's office. It was a message from High Chancellor Zexatoral. Your representative proved unusually resistant to our standard protocols. Such defiance indicates your species requires proper guidance before joining the galactic community. We will arrive within your solar year to begin the necessary adjustments to your civilization. Resistance is both futile and unnecessary. The process is for your own advancement. Scott slammed her fist on the desk. They think they can intimidate us. They have no idea what they've done. She immediately called an emergency meeting of the United Earth Defense Council. As the highest-ranking military officer in Earth Space Command, her voice carried significant weight. The 12 council members listened in horrified silence as Scott presented the evidence of what had happened to Ambassador Wright and her team. When she finished, the room was quiet for several long moments. What about the rest of the diplomatic team? Asked General Luis Ramirez, representative for the American continents. Captain Miller is alive but badly injured, Scott replied. Officer, Hayes is presumed dead. Security Chief Garcia was killed during an escape attempt. We have no information on Cultural Attaché Davis. And you believe an invasion is coming? Asked Counselor Amara Okafor from the African Union. I don't just believe it. I know it, Scott said firmly. The Vahalrani message was clear. They see us as a resource to be exploited and our population as potential slave labor. President Elena Chen, who chaired the council, spoke for the first time. What are you proposing, Admiral? Scott activated a holographic display showing Earth's current military capabilities. We've been studying Confederation technology since first contact. We've managed to adapt some of their principles to our own systems. She manipulated the display to show a fleet of ships, some existing, some still under construction. Project Safeguard was established as a contingency plan. I'm recommending we accelerate it and prepare for war. War? Exclaimed Counselor Patel, from the Indian subcontinent. Against an adversary centuries ahead of us technologically. They're advanced, yes, Scott acknowledged, but not unbeatable. Captain Miller has been lucid enough to share some critical information. The Valrani rely heavily on intimidation. Most species surrender without a fight. They don't expect resistance. Even so, said Counselor Zhao from East Asia, how can we possibly win against such odds? By using what they don't expect, Scott replied. Humans have something the Valrani don't understand, determination in the face of impossible odds. They think sending our ambassador back in pieces will break us. Instead, it will unite us. President Chen stood, her face resolute. I'm calling for a vote. All in favor of implementing Admiral Scott's recommendations and placing Earth's forces on war footing? One by one, the council members voted. The decision was unanimous. It's done, Chen said. Admiral Scott, you have full authority to prepare Earth's defenses and organize our response. What is your first order? Scott looked at each council member in turn. First, we keep this quiet from the public for now. We don't need panic. Second, I want every shipyard on Earth and in orbit working round the clock on the new fleet. Third, I need our best scientists focused on weaponry that can penetrate Valrani shields. As the meeting adjourned, President Chen pulled Scott aside. Do you really believe we can win this, Karen? Scott's eyes were hard as steel. Madam President, the Valrani made a fundamental mistake. They thought terror would weaken us, but humans don't work that way. When pushed to the edge, when given one good reason to fight, we don't back down. We push back harder. As Scott left the council chambers, her communication device signaled an incoming message from Luna Station. Captain Miller was asking to speak with her urgently. Admiral, Miller said when she answered, his voice stronger than before. There's something else you need to know about the Valrani. Something I saw in their labs that could change everything. 6 months passed in a blur of activity. Every shipyard on Earth and in orbit worked day and night. Factory lights never dimmed as weapons and armor were produced in numbers not seen since the old world wars. Scientists worked around the clock, applying what they had learned from studying Confederation technology. At the center of it all was Admiral Karen Scott, coordinating the massive effort from Earth Space Command headquarters. She had barely slept in months, but her determination never wavered. Captain John Miller had recovered enough to join her team. Though his body still bore the scars of his time in Valrani captivity, his mind remained sharp. The information he provided about Valrani shield frequencies and defensive patterns proved invaluable. The fleet is ready for inspection, Admiral, Miller reported, entering Scott's office with a tablet displaying the latest updates. Scott looked up from her desk, which was covered with tactical displays and reports. How many ships? 312 combat-ready vessels, Miller answered with pride. The first wave is fully crewed and armed with the new shield-penetrating weapons. Scott nodded, allowing herself a small smile. The Valrani expect us to be preparing, a diplomatic response to their ultimatum. They think we'll beg for mercy. They don't understand humans very well, Miller said grimly. No, they don't. Scott stood and looked out the window at the Earth below. Have you heard about what happened when the news of Ambassador Wright finally went public? Miller shook his head. I expected panic, fear, maybe even calls for surrender. Scott's voice was quiet. Instead, we got unity like I've never seen. Volunteers lined up around blocks to join the fleet. Nations that have been enemies for generations pooled their resources. When humans have one clear enemy, we become something else entirely. They gave us one reason to go to war, Miller said, echoing the phrase that had become something of a rallying cry. And we're going to show them exactly what that means. Scott turned back to face him. The fleet launches tomorrow. I want you on the flagship with me. Miller looked surprised. Admiral? The USS Lillian Wright needs its captain, Scott said firmly. There's no one better qualified to lead our main assault force. Miller straightened, his eyes bright with emotion. It would be my honor, Admiral. The massive fleet departed Earth. The next day, each ship bearing the new emblem of Earth's unified forces, a simple image of a broken chain against a field of stars. The USS Lillian Wright led the formation, its hull gleaming with new armor plating specially designed to resist Valrani weapons. As they prepared to make the jump to faster-than-light travel, Admiral Scott addressed the fleet from the bridge of the flagship. Men and women of Earth, today we answer the Valrani threat not with fear but with fire. They believe that by sending our ambassador back in pieces, they would break our spirit. Instead, they united humanity as nothing ever has before. Remember why we fight. Remember Ambassador Wright and her team who tried to extend the hand of friendship and were met with cruelty. The Valrani believe we are primitive and weak. Today, we prove them wrong. The fleet jumped to FTL speed, beginning the journey to Arcturus Prime. The trip would take 2 weeks, half the time of the original diplomatic mission, thanks to the improved engines developed based on Confederation technology. During the journey, a small scout ship intercepted the fleet. Captain Miller was called to the docking bay as the ship's occupant was brought aboard the USS Lillian Wright. "Captain Miller," said a thin, exhausted-looking man with a wild beard and haunted eyes. Miller stared in shock. "William Davis? We thought you were dead." Davis smiled weakly. "Nearly was, many times, but I had a promise to keep." Davis had spent months in hiding on Arcturus Prime, working with a growing resistance movement among the non-Valrani species of the Confederation. Thrix, his Pelleran contact, had helped him escape on a merchant vessel. "The Valrani don't expect any resistance," Davis explained in Admiral Scott's office. "Their defensive systems are focused outward, not inward, and there are many in the Confederation who secretly hate Valrani rule." Scott leaned forward. "Are you saying we have potential allies?" "More than allies," Davis replied. "We have an entire resistance network ready to sabotage key systems when we attack." This news changed everything. The battle plans were quickly revised to incorporate this unexpected advantage. 2 days later, the Earth fleet dropped out of FTL travel on the outskirts of the Arcturus system. Rather than the gradual approach the Valrani would expect from a primitive species, Scott ordered the entire fleet to jump simultaneously to positions surrounding Arcturus Prime. On the Confederation capital world, alarms blared as 300 Earthships appeared in their space without warning. Valrani defensive systems scrambled to respond, but were hampered by mysterious power failures and system malfunctions caused by Davis's resistance contacts. High Chancellor Zexitoral was in the middle of a council meeting when the attack began. His skin paled to a sickly yellow as reports flooded in. "Impossible," he kept saying. "They couldn't have built a fleet this size in such a short time. They're primitives." Admiral Scott's message was broadcast across all Confederation frequencies. "High Chancellor Zexitoral, this is Admiral Karen Scott of Earth Space Command. You mistook our diplomacy for weakness. You believed our desire for peace meant we couldn't wage war. You thought sending back our ambassador in pieces would break our spirit. Instead, it united us as nothing ever has. We only needed one reason to go to war. You gave it to us. Now learn what happens when humanity fights as one." The Battle of Arcturus Prime lasted less than a day. The Valrani forces, used to intimidating technologically inferior species into submission, had never faced an enemy that combined determination with cunning and sheer numerical advantage. Earth's new weapons tore through the Valrani shields, while the resistance sabotaged their defense grid from within. Captain Miller led the assault team that captured High Chancellor Zexitoral in his own chambers. The once proud Valrani leader cowered as Miller approached. "You're not going to kill me?" Zexitoral asked, his skin rippling with fear. "No," Miller replied coldly. "We're not like you. You'll stand trial for what you did to Ambassador Wright and countless other species." Within weeks of the Valrani defeat, the other species of the Confederation rose up against their former overlords. Earth helped establish a new galactic council based on principles of self-determination and mutual respect. with a special provision that acts against diplomatic envoys would be considered declarations of total war. 1 year after the victory, a memorial to Ambassador Lillian Wright was unveiled in Geneva, where the new Galactic Council headquarters had been established. The crystal monument caught the sunlight, sending rainbows dancing across the gathered crowd. Admiral Scott stood beside Captain Miller at the ceremony, both now wearing the new uniform of Earth's Diplomatic Protection Force. "What do you think she would say about all this?" Miller asked quietly as they looked at Wright's image engraved in the memorial. Scott considered for a moment. "I think she'd be sad it came to war, but proud of what came after. She always believed in diplomacy, but she also understood that sometimes you have to stand your ground." The inscription on the memorial read simply, "She went in peace. We followed in righteous fury. May the stars remember both." As representatives from 26 different worlds mingled peacefully at the reception, the lesson was clear to all. Humans make better friends than enemies. But if you force them to be the latter, heaven help you, because Earth only needs one reason to go to war.